Welcome to the section on individualized education programs, commonly called the IEP. And IEP is just an acronym for Individualized Education Program. Some people call it an Individualized Education Plan. Either way works, program, plan, just as long as you know that it's called an IEP. The IEP is central to making the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act idea work. And let me give you a little background so that you know where the IEP process came from. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was enacted in 1973. And essentially what the Rehab Act of 1973 did, Section 504, was give civil rights to people with disabilities. It's very similar to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and it enumerated the different rights that people with disabilities have, and one of those rights was education. But what Congress was finding, even though they enacted Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, they were finding that kids with disabilities really weren't getting the education that they needed. In some places they were, but generally they found through studies that they weren't getting the education that they were entitled to. So what Congress did was they enacted the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is very statutorily intensive, and we'll show you some of those statutes that are involved here. But what it does is it lays out step by step by step what a school district is supposed to do in order to come up with a plan, an IEP, for a child with a disability to guarantee their education. And so Congress thought, how do we do this exactly? And I don't know who came up with the idea exactly of an IEP team and an IEP plan, but it works pretty well. What happens is what Congress was finding was there's two different sides. On one side, there's a parent who wants everything in the world for their child, and that's appropriate. We encourage that and advocate for that. On the other side is school districts who want to help educate the child, but they also have legitimate fiscal money concerns. They also have legitimate staffing concerns. Those type of things they have to address also. So you put these two entities together, and often they don't conflict, but sometimes they do. So Congress said, how do we get these people together and come up with the best plan for a child? And let's show you how they did that. Here is the parent, A on this end, and Z on the other end is the school district. So Congress decided, like we talked about, here's the parent interest right here, and here's the school district interest. And so in between here, what Congress did was they put different individuals to attend an IEP meeting. And these individuals all have to have one thing in common. And the thing they have to have in common is that they know the child, they have knowledge of the child and the child's unique abilities. And that's really important because the person in the meeting need to know what the child's capable of and what they're not capable of and what they need work on and where they're at and where we want to be. So they all have to have unique knowledge about the child. So they included in this team the regular classroom teacher and the special ed teacher, the psychologist who serves the child, like I said, the special ed teacher, therapists, it could be a physical therapist, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, the administration, which of course is the school, and the parent, which of course is over here, and a parent can bring advocates to the meeting if they want to. The child can attend. Generally, the child attends when they're in transition, but we can talk more about that. And other people that have unique knowledge of the child. And what they do is they come to the meeting and they all meet and they come up with a plan for an educational plan for your child. That's what an IEP team looks like. So when you go to a meeting, that's why those people are at the meeting. Finally, I want to say in the overview, we'll go through this a little bit, and then I'll describe the rest of the section on IEP. But I just want to tell you this before we go on. An IEP is really pretty simple and straightforward. I know there's lots of people at the meeting. You get notice of the meeting. They hand you procedural safeguards, which are your rights. People take notes. It all seems very formal, and it's kind of intimidating. But I want you to remember 5 things. And on the next slide, you can take a look at those 5 things, and I encourage you to make a copy of it that you can take to the meeting if you want to, or look over before you go to the meeting. But here's what an IEP is. Where is your child at right now? How is he doing right now? Where do you want your child to be in 1 year? and beyond. But generally, IEPs are written for 1 year. Where do you want your child to be in a year? How do we get there? What tools do we need? And how do we measure that we're getting there? And that's all an IEP is those 5 things. So let's take a quick look at those 5 things, and then we'll move on. Where are we at right now? Now, in the meeting, this will be described as present levels of performance. It usually comes at the beginning of the meeting. They discuss where your child is at right now. This is based upon reports from you, the parent, reports from teachers, reports from therapists. It's also based upon the multidisciplinary evaluation that is provided to the IEP team. You'll get a chance to look at that ahead of time. We have a letter that you can ask for that ahead of time so you can take a look. But really all we're talking about here is where's your child at right now? Where do we want to be? And this is where do we want to be in 1 year? These are annual goals and objectives. We'll talk about those in the IEP meeting. And often these are written ahead of time, but sometimes they're modified. Well, most of the time they're modified at the IEP meeting, so you have some input on exactly where do we want to be in a year? What are our goals? Sometimes these goals are set high, and I'd encourage you to allow schools to set the goals high. There's no penalty for not reaching the goals, but we don't want low goals. We want high goals. So schools are good at setting good high goals for your child where they want to be at in a year. And although they're often talking about annual goals, the annual goals are tied into your future education for your child also. But during the meeting, you'll be talking about where do we want to be in a year, annual goals. How do we get there? And this is why you're having the meeting. This is the IEP program or the IEP plan. It's a plan on how do you get to these annual goals that you want to be to in a year. Often they have benchmarks, they have ways of reporting progress, but really it's a plan on what services do we need to get to where we want to be in a year. So we're here right now. This is where we want to be in a year. What services do we need to get there? What tools do we need to get there? Do we need speech-language pathology? Do we need occupational therapy? Do we need physical therapy? Do we need assistive technology? Let's say, for example, that your child has a hard time hearing. Do they need an FM system that amplifies the teacher's voice in the classroom? If not, do there need to be modifications? Once again, if your child doesn't hear very well, if we move them to the front of the classroom, do they hear better? Those are the tools that we need to get to our annual goals. How do we measure that we're getting there? Like I said before, often there's benchmarks included in the IEP. You should be discussing the goals with your teachers. All your teachers should have a copy of the IEP. All of them that provide services to your child and are included in the IEP should have a copy. Sometimes I've seen parents send notebooks back and forth to school just to track how their child is doing. So essentially what we're looking at is, once again, where are we at? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? What tools do we need to get there? And how do we know that we're getting there? And those are really the 5 things that sum up what an IEP is. That's an overview of the IEP. In the next sections, we'll be talking more about IEPs. The very next section will break down the rules and regs into more understandable language. What is an IEP? Who are the mandatory participants in an IEP meeting? Issues like that. After that, we actually have the rules and regs that you can look at if you want to. Another section, we have the forms. When you're in an IEP meeting and somebody's on the other side typing away on the computer, what are they putting into the computer? We actually have the form that they use at the meeting that we'll go through with you so you can take a look at so you know exactly what's happening at the meeting. We also have links to other organizations and the State Department of Education to help you understand IEPs better. And we also have a quick overview of case law on IEPs. All that is included in the next section, so if you feel like going on there, feel free to do so.